those of you that were here yesterday morning, I made you do some weird stuff. Who was here yesterday morning? Okay, quite a few. I'm not going to do that now, so don't worry. I'm just going to talk to you. But it is going to be interactive a little bit. We're going to have a few times of breakout, where I'll have you get into the groups that you're with here and discuss some things, because I think that's how learning happens. It happens when we have an opportunity to share with one another and give our experiences and tell what worked and what didn't work, and just to have that opportunity to really dialogue around it. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that as we go through some of the content today. I want to start out with two principles that I have learned. Lisa mentioned earlier what I do for a living. I am a change management consultant, and so I work with large corporations, and I help the people that work in those corporations and also the companies to move forward through big changes that they're implementing. And a lot of times it's computer system changes. So I do a lot of work around information technology and those sorts of things. But it all comes back to the people. And the first thing that I'll tell you, and I think you would agree with me, most people don't like change. I think that's a pretty common denominator around the human race, is that we tend to be resistant to change. We get used to our way of doing things, we like things a certain way, and when we're asked to do something maybe completely different, it throws us, it shocks us, and we don't want to do it. So that's the first thing that I would put out there. The second thing is that change doesn't happen at the church level. Change happens one individual at a time. And so we have to focus on individual people and move each individual people through a change process that gets them used to where we want them to be. In this case, adopting a relational discipleship method and message and following Jesus' way of doing things. Churches that have been around for many, many years, I know there are a lot of churches here that have been around 70 years, 100 years. There's a lot of history involved there and a lot of ways of doing things, and people are used to things a certain way. And so I will tell you up front that for older churches, the journey is much more difficult and it takes longer, but that's okay. You've heard Pastor Brandon say that slow is fast and fast is slow. So what does that mean? It means that if we start off slow and we take our time and we're very intentional, that's a word that you've heard us use a lot over the last couple of days. If we're very intentional and slow and we focus on individual people, then the change is going to go much faster than it would if we try to have the pastor stand at the front of the stage and say, we're not doing Sunday school anymore, we are moving to small groups and we're going to do relational discipleship. How do you think that would go over for a church that's been around for 70 years and has done Sunday school for 70 years? Big, big shock, right? So I want to introduce you to a model that I use with my clients, but I have also used it in several very large megachurches to help them navigate some pretty big changes that they've been moving through. And so it's an acronym. And I know from just the short amount of time that I've been here in Singapore, you all love your acronyms. They're everywhere. And so my favorite one is ERP. And so that has kind of a disgusting meaning in the U.S. when you hear somebody say ERP. But that's just an observation. But I'm going to introduce you to an acronym, and I'll use the whiteboard to start with, and in a moment we'll put it up on the screen, and you'll be able to see it from there a little bit clearer. Is that visible to everybody? Can you guys see that? Okay. So I'm going to try to write as dark as I can because I know it's hard to see from the back. But the acronym that I'm going to share with you is ADKAR. And it's A, D, K, A, R, ADKAR. And each of those letters stands for a stage of change that an individual person will go through as they get used to a new idea or a new concept or a new way of doing things, switching from Sunday school methodology or the way of doing things to small groups in homes. This is a tool, that's all it is. It's just a tool that can help you to navigate that change. And it's real easy to remember too, which is what I love. So the first letter here, A, stands for awareness. So when I say awareness, what do you think I mean? Somebody yell out what you think awareness is. What would that result in? Anybody? What's that? Okay. Yep. Usually it's just simply communication. It's creating awareness through having dialogue with somebody, and that can be done through a memo, a email. But I'll tell you, it's best done person to person, face to face, especially when it's a big change that is going to be very, very difficult for some people to grasp. And so awareness is it's giving them the reasons why you're moving to a relational discipleship model. So Pastor Brandon spoke a lot about the biblical foundation for relationship. And so that would be a really great place to start with somebody to bring that awareness. Oh, good, you got it up on the screen there. So the second letter is D, and that stands for desire. And these are building blocks. In other words, you start here, and you can't move to desire until somebody has awareness. And you can't move from the D to the K until they have that D. So it's a step-by-step process that we're following here. Now, desire is getting somebody to the point where they can support what you're asking them to do and actually participate in building a relational discipleship environment where you are. So you want them, by creating awareness and sharing, and I'm going to get into more detail about that, and you have some of the materials in your book relate to that. But once you've created that awareness, then you focus on getting them to the point where they really want to participate and they fully support what you're doing, or what you're asking of them, and ultimately the church to do there. And part of that is explaining what the benefits of that change might be. The benefits of going to a relational discipleship model and small groups. The third letter, the K, stands for knowledge. How do you get knowledge? What's a way to get knowledge? Who's been to school? Come on, audience. I need some audience participation here. How do you get knowledge? What's that? Sure. Research is a way. That's a way to get knowledge. Training is a really great way to get knowledge. But you have to get them to the point that they know how to do small group. They know how to do storytelling. They know how to cover the guidelines that we've talked about, and that some of you that were here yesterday, you saw us model up here on stage. And so getting them to the point where they feel comfortable and they have the head knowledge and they know what the steps are. The next step, once you've gotten them to the point where they have knowledge, is you want to get them to the point where they have ability. And those may seem similar, but they're really very different. And I'll give you an example. Ability is being able to implement well and to actually do it. So knowledge is more, I've been trained on it, I've read a lot of stuff, I know a lot of stuff about it, but ability is being able to actually put it into practice. And so a personal example for me is one of my hobbies is I love reading stories about people who climb Mount Everest. And it just, for whatever reason, it really intrigues me. And I love just hearing the stories about, climbing up to the point where airplanes fly. When we flew over here from the United States, we were flying at 30,000 feet, and Mount Everest is about that high. And so that's just mind-boggling to me, and just reading about the process of what happens to your body when you get at that level of altitude, and how your body actually starts to die at that point when you get that high. So it just fascinates me. So I have a lot of knowledge about climbing Mount Everest, but do you think I have the ability to actually do it? I couldn't even make it to base camp, I'll tell you that much, and that's pretty low. I doubt I could even, get off the plane at Kathmandu where they start. So it's very different, and one of the ways that you get people to acquire that ability is that you give them a chance to practice. And so that gets back to our concept of having an apprentice in our groups as we start our small group process, and we start to model how that works. We look and we observe the people in our group, and we identify somebody that we think might really be the next person that could be a leader. And you start to focus on that individual, and you coach them and you train them, and then you give them opportunity to practice. You let them lead a group. And so they are responsible then for asking the questions of the group and leading the discussion and managing some of the group dynamics. But you're there with them, and so it's a safe environment for them. You want to make sure that you're creating safety when you do that, but you're giving them the opportunity to practice in a safe environment. Finally, the last letter here in ADKAR is reinforcement. At the very bottom here. Could you go ahead and put the next slide up? Because that has it all, it's all written down up there. A little bit easier to see maybe. Reinforcement is really, in very simple terms, is making sure that it sticks. That your culture of your church actually adopts a relational discipleship way of doing things, and that it continues on. I've been in some smaller groups with some of you during lunch, and I know on one occasion Pastor Brandon talked about pastors sometimes have this, they tend to want to chase after the next newest thing. And so they'll start something, they'll head down a path, and then somebody comes out with a new book that presents a new way of doing something, and we're going to do this now. And they start over here, and so then everybody in the congregation is trying to adjust to the old change that we just put in place, and now we're already off on something new. So it's really important when you get to this reinforcement stage that you focus on making sure that it sticks. And some ways of doing that, first of all, is measuring, how well are you making disciples? Are you making disciples that can make disciples? And we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of days talking about that piece of it. Maybe you need to take some corrective action. Maybe something's not working quite right, and you're not making disciples that are making other disciples, and it's sort of stagnating. You need to find out why, and then fix it. So sometimes it means just having conversation with some of your group leaders and finding out what's going on. That's part of the process that we advocate putting in place, is having a coaching network within the small groups in your church. Once you have a certain number of small groups that are happening, it's very helpful sometimes to have a coach that's coaching some of those leaders of the other small groups. And then that's where that can start to happen if you're not seeing the results that you're looking for. And then finally, as part of reinforcement, we want to celebrate success. I think that is one of the things that I see it in the corporate world as well as in the church world. We just don't celebrate success enough. And we tend to, before we ever finish a project or a change or get 10 small groups going, whatever the goal is, when we get to that point and we see God doing miraculous, marvelous things, we're already thinking about the next piece that we need to be focused on, and we're already headed down that path, and we lose sight of what God has already done in the midst. And so I would just really encourage you, wherever you are in this journey of relational discipleship, take time to celebrate, because it is so important. God loves that when we can celebrate what he's doing, and that is pleasing to his heart. Does that make sense to you all? That model? And again, it's just a tool. That's all it is. I'm not saying that you have to go back and do ADCAR at your church, but it might be something that would be helpful for you to reflect back on. And if you're seeing certain behaviors in your leaders, your church leaders, that you're trying to explain relational discipleship to, this might be helpful in terms of what the next step might be and what the gap is, what's missing, and where do you need to go from there. So in your workbooks, let's see what page it's on. It starts on page 48. I'll direct you to that first. There are, the title of that section is Overcoming Obstacles for Change. And I really prefer to use the word challenge rather than obstacle, because I think obstacle sounds very negative, and God can remove obstacles. But sometimes God puts challenges in our path that he wants us to rely on him to overcome. And so let's consider using the word challenge as we work through these pieces here. But I've identified 3 challenges that I have seen in the churches that I've worked with. And by the way, they are not uncommon to what I see in the corporate world either. People are people. And as I said at the beginning, change happens one person at a time. And so we have to focus on the individual. And all individuals tend to want to resist change. So the first challenge that I would put before you is creating proper awareness. It's this piece right here. That is where most change initiatives fall flat and die out. It's because the proper awareness is not created up front. And I put some scripture here that I think is very appropriate for what I have seen in churches. And this is from the Message, but the King James may say it a little bit plainer, but if people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what he reveals, they are most blessed. And the King James Version reads, where there is no vision, the people perish. And so you have to lay out the vision for what it is that God is leading you to do and why it's important to be in relationship with one another and why it's important to implement a relational discipleship model if that's where God is leading you. And so the vision really answers the question, why? Why are we doing this? We've been doing Sunday school for 30 years. We've been doing Sunday school for 120 years, whatever it is. Why do we need to change? I don't get it. So that's the first piece that people want to know. And that's just human nature. You want to know why. Why are you asking me to do this? And so explaining that is really important. And going back to the biblical foundation that Brandon has laid out so well of following Jesus' message and method. We have no right to change either of those. And that's the reason. That is the why this is so important. Another piece of the vision is, I almost don't like this word, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's communicating the benefits of it. But think in terms of what value does this have to the kingdom of God? What value does relational discipleship have to the kingdom? So you start there, and you explain that, and explain how that works, and how the multiplication process works, that we've talked about a lot. And because we're moving people one individual at a time, sometimes it's important to talk to them about the personal benefit to them, why this might be important to them, and what the opportunities are for them, how they can be a leader in this, and they can bring people to Christ through this. They can invite their neighbors, whatever it may be. And there's a phrase that you may have heard. It's called WIFM, WIIFM. What's in it for me? That's kind of what that gets to. But of course, it's not a selfish motive here. It's what can I do as an individual, and how can I help to impact the kingdom through this. The second piece there, once you've communicated the vision and everybody that you're speaking with has a pretty clear understanding of that, is that you want to give them the details, because people want to know the details. They want to know, okay, I get it. I understand why we're doing this. I know it's a benefit to the kingdom. I know Jesus told us that this is what we need to do. But how? How are we going to do this? How will we implement this? What does it look like? So some questions that you might hear, and this is on your page. When is this happening? How soon are we going to start this? So that's something that you want to think through and be prepared to have some time frame in mind. And it doesn't have to be specific to a month. It can be, well, we're going to evaluate some things for the next 3 months. We're going to have a call with Pastor Brandon in 4 months. We're going to see where we're at that point and make some decisions then. So just being honest with them about what the time frame looks like. Will I be trained is probably another piece, because people want to know, how am I going to get that knowledge? Yeah, I get it. I understand why. I want to do it. I'm on board with you. I'll follow the church's direction on that. But I don't know anything about how to lead a small group. How am I going to learn that? And so being prepared to explain what that training process will look like is important. You might get some questions around the small group process. And if you already have small groups in place, maybe it's, well, how are those going to change? Are they going to change? What's it going to look like now? Or if you're a church that only does Sunday school now, people are going to have questions about that. What does that mean for Sunday school? What does that mean for Bible study? Are we going to do both? Are we only going to do small groups that focus on storytelling? So you'll want to think about some of that stuff. And then finally, it's super, super important to be authentic and to be transparent as you communicate and as you create the awareness. Lisa mentioned about the millennials and the younger generation, that they can sniff out hypocrites in no time. And they can sniff out, when somebody's dodging the real answer to the question. And so if you don't know the answer to a question that's being asked you, it's okay to say, you know what, I don't have the answer to that right now. We're still wrestling with that as a leadership team. As soon as we know, I'm going to get back to you all, and we'll let you know as soon as we arrive at a decision or a solution to that. But don't make something up. That's the worst thing that you can do, because it may change later, and then it's in conflict. What actually happens is different than what you told them was going to happen, and so you lose trust, you lose credibility that way. If you will turn to page 50 in your book, at the bottom of the page, there are 3 discussion questions. And each of those questions deals with one of these challenges that I'm speaking to today. And what I'd like you to do, if you're here with other members or leaders from your church congregation, I'd like you all to gather together as a group to work through the first question, which deals with the creating of the awareness, and have some good, healthy discussion around this. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do that. If you're not here, if you're here by yourself, or if there's just a few of you, please join in with another group. We're a friendly crowd here. I know that they will invite you in, and it won't be a problem. So I'd like you to get into groups of no more than 10 people, and have some discussion around that first question, and then we'll get back together and we'll have a little debrief and move on from there. Sounds like you're having a lot of great discussion, and that's awesome. Before we actually get into that next piece, so I'd like to hear from a few of you what some of the things were that you discussed. So the question was either how would you create awareness about discipleship in your church? What are some ways that you might do that? Or how would you best describe overall kingdom benefits of relational discipleship model? And then what are some examples of personal benefits that you might be able to explain? Lisa has a microphone here. It's a bit difficult for me to hear from the stage when people are talking, so I've asked her if she would walk the aisles, and if you can contribute something, please raise your hand and she'll bring the mic to you. So somebody from your group, just pick a spokesperson.
Okay, our group, we came up with a list, right? And there is actually a mix of personal as well as kingdom perspective. So the first one is about motivation. You have the personal motivation to reach out to more people as you are discipled, right? And as well, and as you disciple others as well. Then, of course, another personal gain is that as you disciple others, you are also learning and you grow as a Christian, okay? Yeah. And in a situation where relational discipleship takes place, you are cared for, okay? And there's a win-win, because not only does your disciplee gets disciple and grow, but you as a discipler, you also grow, okay? Then, of course, one of them mentioned that, well, it's cost-effective. You don't have to get someone a high-paying, okay, I'm not pastor, but somebody who is more qualified, to share. So we guide each other, we disciple each other. And first and foremost, of course, the Great Commission is biblical. It's based on the Word of God, okay? And it also creates a, what we say, Acts community, whereby, remember the early church in Acts, right? They were sharing and they were loving each other. They were just practicing that bonding and, helping each other to grow. Now, the other perspective is that we say that when, A disciples B, B disciples C, it becomes a multiplier, and that's how we grow as a church in that relational model. It reflects the kingdom, the identity, okay, of Christ, as well as, we said there's no need for high-powered pastor, because everyone is supposed to be a priest, right?
Right.
And you're supposed to disciple. The sense of belonging is there, and people has a need for connection. If we don't connect with them this way, you don't be surprised if your church members do leave the church because they don't have any relationship with any of the members. Yep. I think that's, last but not least, it's an eternal benefit, it's kingdom perspective.
That's an awesome list. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's have one more person quickly just give a few things that you all came up with. Yeah, thank you.
In our group, we identified 3, but we just answered the first
Sure, that's
question.
fine. Yeah.
It would promote unity in the kingdom, the prayer of Jesus Christ in John 17.
Yep.
Another thing, it would simplify the discipling process from all the add-ons that we had already attached to discipleship. And another thing would be, it would help us, the citizens, to live out our identity and do discipleship according to the game plan of the King of the Kingdom.
Sure, that's awesome. Thank you. So I would encourage you guys, or all of you really, if you didn't get through the questions, these are great leadership team questions to take back with you for maybe your staff meetings or other leadership meetings that you have. I'm sure there are other individuals back at your home church that you'll want to bring up to speed on what you learned here, and maybe these are some questions that you can ask during that time. Okay, so let's move on then to the second challenge, and that's what I call mobilizing leaders. And so leadership is vitally important in making sure that a change such as moving to a relational discipleship model from whatever you're doing now, leadership is hugely important in that. You have to have the top leader, and I would insist that that's the senior lead pastor, sponsoring that communication and that movement, everything associated with it. And from the lead pastor, the senior pastor, you want to communicate with the staff and get them on board, make sure they understand the vision, the details, because they're going to get asked by members of the congregation at some point. So why staff before other leaders? Well, first of all, it honors your staff, right? You want them to be prepared and to know what's going on before they hear it on the street, or from somebody that goes to their church, that's their neighbor across the street, for example. It's the right thing to do. It's the right order to handle it, because again, they're going to be asked questions, and you want to equip them. The worst thing that can happen, really, or a not so good thing that can happen, is if somebody comes up to a staff person and wants to know something about what we're doing with relational discipleship and what is this small group thing all about, and the staff member has no idea what they're talking about because they've not been told anything about it yet. So make sure that your staff knows. Then I would bring in some of your key leadership teams as the next level, and that may be your eldership, maybe your deacons, maybe your small group leaders, if it's a Sunday school environment, maybe it's the Sunday school leadership. But bring in the next layer of leadership down from there. And then look at who your other lay leaders are out there and pull them in. Because there may be other leadership roles that don't fall into those other categories, but they may not just be quite as influential as some of the other ones. So I guess what I'm saying is start with your most influential leaders and work your way down, because it's one of those trickle down effect ideas that when you get your most influential leaders, they can influence and help you to influence the next layer down, and then it kind of continues on down through the church that way. Understand your informal network. Do you understand what I mean when I say informal network? There's always a group of individuals or people in your church that have a lot of influence over a certain number of congregants. And you want to know who those people are because you need them on your side. You need to get them to understand the vision and to have the desire to change and to want to support and get on board with what you're doing. Because sometimes that can really, I've seen it, it can really backfire on you if some of those, if you haven't identified some of those people in your informal network that are very influential, but maybe they're not in a key leadership role. And if they don't like what's going on, they can create a lot of turmoil in the church that just doesn't need to be there. So how do you identify those people? You just talk to people. You talk to your leadership teams. You talk to your staff. You talk to other leadership layers, and they know who those people are, and you go from there. But that's very important to make sure that you're casting the net around those people as well and bringing them into the process. Thirdly, engage your leaders in the process. Make them a part of it. So if you are asked your opinion, don't you feel valued? If somebody asks you for your opinion or your idea, doesn't that make you want to help? It does me. And I think most of us would say yes to that. We want to exploit their ideas, and we can't be so arrogant to think that we have all the ideas and that we're the only ones that know the right thing to do. Everybody's different. Everybody's wired different. God gifted us each differently, and so we can learn a lot from other people. Because everybody comes in with their own experiences and their own backgrounds, and that can be very beneficial to you. So engage them in the process, get them involved. That gets their support early on because you've involved them. They know what's going on early on. They're very supportive early on. And then they can lead others if they're on board with it as well. Allow appropriate input and ownership. That's another piece, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the prior one there. But sometimes people just want to be asked their opinion. They just want to be included in the process, and it's just respectful to do that. And so ask for input, and don't promise that you're going to adopt every idea that they come up with, because we all know that can't happen. Not every idea can be implemented, but let them know that you appreciate what they have to offer, thank them, and just let them know that you value what they bring to the table and what they're contributing to you. And then finally, I would say leaders cannot check out of the process. That's so important to know, especially the lead pastor. If you are a lead pastor in this room and you're pursuing this relational discipleship shift in your church, you have got to stay with it. You can't attend one or two meetings and then turn it over to your executive pastor or your small group pastor and let them run with it, and that's all that you do. You have got to be active in the process, and you've got to be visible in the process. That's one of the fundamental things with moving individuals through change, is that they have to see from the top leadership that this is a priority. And so that means attending meetings. It means talking about it from the stage. It means having individual conversations where they're needed when people have questions. So not only the senior pastors, but all the other leaders have got to stay engaged in the process, or it will stagnate, it will fail. I've seen that happen so many times when you just don't have a leader that's committed to moving forward with this. So we're going to break out again with another question around that, and it's number 2 on page 50. How can you best lead, prepare, and encourage your staff and lay leaders during this change, during the movement to a relational discipleship way of doing things? And then what's worked well in the past for you, and what are you going to do differently this time? Okay? So stay in your same groups, and I'm going to give you 10 more minutes, and then we'll do a short debrief, and then there's one more section, and we'll close out. All right, let's wrap up. Lisa's got the mic up front, so I'd like to have a couple of different people than last time, if you would, from your group. Give us some of your best ideas on how you can lead, prepare, and encourage your staff and lay leaders. Boy, this must be a really engaging topic because I can't get anybody's attention.
You guys have learned relationship well.
Yes.
Good job. All right, if you can hear me, say shh.
Wow.
Works every time. Takes a mom to do that, right?
Yeah, I think we learned that with kindergartners. All right, so somebody different from last time. Give us some of your best ideas around how you can lead, prepare, and encourage your staff and lay leaders as you move to a relational discipleship model.
So our group talked about how it's important to communicate the end in mind. So if we can share what the end looks like to everyone who is involved in the process, then they can be, of course, motivated towards the end, as well as they can put up with the challenges during the transition. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So when you've gone through changes in your church before, what's worked well? What was something that you came up with that worked well? Okay, well, so let's ask this. For a change that did not go well, what are you going to do differently this next time? Is there somebody over here? The lady in the pink sweater. Do you have something? Anything you want to contribute? She's going to talk.
All right. Awesome.
We actually talk about certain program that we had in the past in the church. So one of the things is not to take it as a program, but it's take of something like as something that is continuous. Mm-hmm. And the other aspect that we should also take note of is like confidentiality among the group itself. That we make sure that whatever that is shared should be contained in the group, and also there should be. And it's very good if we can build relations. What was mentioned in the morning. Yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, we're on the home stretch. So the last challenge that I want to present to you is about sustaining momentum. So once you get to the point where you've got a couple of small groups that are doing relational storying and are in group together, how do you keep it going? How do you grow it? How do you build momentum and make it stick, if you will? It's this reinforcement piece that we talked about earlier. That is a challenge that I see, especially in churches that I have worked with in the past, making sure that stays. We use the term embed. Does that make sense to you? Do you know what that means? Embed it, to make it part of the fabric of your church culture. Is always a challenge. And so what you want to do is, and I believe Pastor Brandon spoke about this. I've been in so many conversations with him over the last year or two that I get it all mixed up. But one of the things that you can do is make sure that all of your activity that happens in the church funnels into a small group of some kind. And that's one way to embed that concept into the fabric, the culture of your church, is that everything is done in small group. So there aren't men's ministry big hoo-ha events that happen every quarter. It's all about small groups. So that's just one way of doing that. Measurement is another way that you can keep and sustain that momentum. You have to know where you are in order to know if you're moving forward, right? So measuring, and I would say, I think we've talked more about the qualitative aspect of measurement than anything. So are you making disciples that are making disciples? That's really the true measurement that you're looking at. And yes, there's some quantitative things that you can look at to help you measure what's going on there, but that's really the true measurement there. That's the measure of success. Making sure that you have the right systems and processes. So that gets back to this knowledge and ability piece, really. In my mind, that's where that would happen, is to make sure that you've got a training system or a training process in place so that new members that join your church know what small group is all about, and they know why it's being done. They know what the purpose of it is. They know how to participate. They get funneled into a small group in whatever fashion makes sense in your culture. But just making sure that you've got the right pieces in place, the mechanics, if you will, to keep it going and keep it running effectively. Identify and close gaps. So you want to, as you're looking at your small group structure, you've started, maybe you're 6 months down the road, you've measured, and you're not quite where you want to be with making disciples that are making disciples. People are, the members of the small groups are not bringing their neighbors, their lost friends into the group, for example. So you have to see kind of where are you in that process, and then what do you do to shore that up? How do you close that gap? How do you create the awareness and get the desire that you need for people to want to bring the lost in and have that heart for the lost? And that's really the Holy Spirit that does that. But that would be a matter of prayer, certainly. And then finally, you just repeat. You have to keep going back through these steps and measuring and looking at what your gaps are, and having your pastor, your lead pastor, speak about it from the stage, and making sure that it's just, everything that you do funnels into a small group of some kind, and relationship is happening in every aspect of your church. And so you keep looking at it, and you keep evaluating, and you keep going with that. So for the last question, and we're supposed to end at 3:45, so we'll make this one a little bit shorter. You'll have 5 minutes, but I think that's pretty good. What are some practical ways that you can create and maintain a culture of relational discipleship in your church? So have 5 minutes of discussion. We'll do some quick wrap up. Please identify somebody in your group that can speak to some of the things that you've identified so we don't have the awkward silence. That'd be great. Thank you. All right, yeah, so here's the question again. What are some practical ways that you can create and maintain a culture of relational discipleship in your church? It's all about sustaining that momentum. So whoever the person was that was picked needs to raise their hand.
I believe that the question itself is the answer. What are some practical ways? It begins first and foremost with yourself.
Okay.
You must be willing to step out of your own comfort zone, your own boundaries into a region that is unknown. That's where and how we can create intentional relationships, relate to one another on a deeper level. And maintaining this culture is not easy. One must have the patience and the heart to invest your time.
Right. And the leadership commitment.
Yes, into that person as well.
That's right. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, and as I've been saying, change happens one person at a time. And so that can start with you. So very good point. Thank you. Okay, one more person. How about somebody in this section over here? I don't think we've heard from anybody over here yet. There's a cluster right here. Does one of you want to speak to it?
We got someone over here.
Okay, good.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We discussed that one of the ways we can create and sustain the culture is to have a consistent message throughout the leadership. Beginning from the pastors as well as the lay leaders and deacons, everyone sharing a consistent message of how we actually intend to do this relational discipleship throughout the entire church. So as we keep on reinforcing this message, then it will help to cultivate the culture.
Great. That's good. Very good. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate your attention. I appreciate your participation in the breakout questioning. You guys did an awesome job, so give yourselves a hand.